Welcome in, football fans of the week that was, where I run down all the team statistical numbers from every game of this past week in the NFL and stick around to the end for my week 5 power rankings. Now, coming up in this edition, the Chargers outlasted the Raiders. But the star for LA had 6 sacks. We'll tell you who it is. CJ Stroud looks very legit as the Texans stomp the Steelers. The Dolphins, who scored 70 points last week, came back to earth on Sunday in Buffalo. I'll tell you their numbers against the Bills. And no, Deshaun Watson was a huge problem for the Cleveland Browns as they get blown out at home by Lamar Jackson's Ravens. But we will start this week, as always, with Thursday Night Football and a matchup for first place in the NFC North, which goes to the Detroit Lions as they defeat the Green Bay Packers 34-20. Next up, the Lions will host the Carolina Panthers, while the Packers are off Vegas for a Monday night tilt with the Raiders. Detroit now sits atop the NFC North with a 3-1 record. Green Bay drops to 2-2. Let's start with the offenses. The Detroit Lions ran 71 plays for 401 yards, averaging 5.65 yards per play, 28 passes for 190, averaging 6.79, and 43 rushes for 211, averaging 4.91. The Lions had 25 first downs. This gives them 87 through 4 games. They were 7 of 17 on third down for 41.1%, and for the season, 22 of 56 for 39.3%. Detroit went 2 for 2 on fourth down, and for the season, 4 for 8. The Lions had 8 penalties for 70 yards and 26 total flags through 4 weeks for 276 yards. Time of possession is 37 minutes and 58 seconds, which puts the Detroit Lions into ball hawk territory. Now, if you're new, a ball hawk is a team that possesses the ball for at least 35 minutes in a game, win or lose. After 4 weeks, the Lions' offense is at 266 plays for 1,545 yards, averaging 386.25 yards per game. 131 passes for 999 yards, averaging 249.75 per game. And 546 yards rushing on 135 attempts, averaging 136.5. The Lions have scored 106 points, averaging 26.5 points per game. The Packers offense ran 48 plays for 230 yards, averaging 4.79 yards per play. 36 passes for 203, averaging 5.64, and 12 rushes for 27 yards, averaging 2.25. Green Bay had 15 first downs, bringing their season total to 68. They were 3 of 11 on third down for 27.3%. and 23 of 54 through 4 weeks at 42.6%. Packers were 1 for 1 on fourth down and 3 for 7 on the season. The Packers had 4 penalties for 51 yards, or rather 31 yards, and 31 total penalties for 251. Time of possessions, 22 minutes and 2 seconds. The Green Bay offense in 4 games has run 224 plays for 1,123 yards, averaging 280.75. 133 passes for 825, averaging 206.25. And 91 rushes for 298, averaging 74.5 yards per game. The Packers offense has scored 100 points, averaging 25 per game. On defense, the Lions had 38 tackles and 177 on the season. They recorded 5 sacks in this game, bringing their season total to 13. They added another forced fumble, their third of the season, and 6 passes defense, bringing them up to 20. Detroit's defense added 2 interceptions, bringing them to 3. And they didn't have any defensive touchdowns in this game, but they have 1 on the season so far. Through 4 games, the Lions defense has surrendered 234 plays for 1,122 yards, averaging 58.5 plays and 280.5 yards per game. 154 passes for 879 yards, averaging 219.75 per game, and 80 rushes for 243, averaging a very good 60.75. Detroit's defense allowed 83 points, averaging 20.75 points per game. 200 in 4 games. They had 2 sacks in the game, bringing their season total to 11. No forced fumbles by the Packer D. That keeps them at 1. And only 2 passes defense brings them to 17. They also added an interception in this game, their third of the season, and no defensive touchdowns. They have 1 from earlier this year. The Packers defense in 4 games has allowed 1,410 yards, averaging 352.5 per game. 789 yards passing, averaging 197.25, and 621 yards rushing, averaging 155.25. So 270 total plays, 131 passing, and 139 rushing. The Packers have now allowed 96 points, averaging 24 a contest. Closing line was Detroit -2, over-under was at 45. The 2 teams combined for 54 points going over the total, 631 yards and 119 plays, averaging 5.3 yards per play. I picked the Packers to win straight up 24-20, and I had them with the 2-point spread. So I lost both those picks, and I'll tell you how I did at the end of the rundown. Now to Sunday, overseas, the Jacksonville Jaguars beat the Atlanta Falcons 23-7. That was a bounce back game for the Jags after that embarrassing home loss to the Texans a week ago. The Jags will remain in London this week to play the Buffalo Bills, while the Falcons return home to host the Houston Texans. Both teams are 2-2. Starting with the offenses, for Jacksonville, 62 plays for 300 yards, 4.84 yards per play, 30 passes for 195, averaging 6.5 yards per pass, and 32 rushes for 105, averaging just 3.28 yards per run. Jacksonville had 16 first downs, which gives them 76 through 4 games. They finished 5 of 14 on third down for 35.7%, and in the first 4 weeks, they're 16 of 51 on third down for 31.4%. The Jaguars went 1 for 2 on fourth down, and for the season, they are now 2 for 7. Jacksonville had 3 penalties for 25 yards and 15 total through 4 games for 129. So they are one of the least penalized teams in football. Jaguars have run 258 plays for 1,317 yards, averaging 329.25 yards per game. 146 passes for 917, averaging 229.25, and an even 400 yards on 112 rushes, averaging an even 100 yards per game. The Jaguars have scored 80 points, averaging 20 per game. The Falcons offense ran 53 plays for 287 yards, averaging 5.42 yards per play. 31 passes for 160, averaging 5.16, and 22 rushes for 127, averaging 5.77. Atlanta had 17 first downs, bringing their season total to 73. They finished 50% on third downs in this game, 6 of 12, and for the season, 18 of 51 for 35.3%. They were 0 for 1 on fourth down, and for the season, 3 for 6. They had 3 penalties for 50 yards and 19 total for 227. Time of possessions, 27 minutes and 9 seconds. Through 4 games, the Falcons offense has run 232 plays for 137 yards, averaging 284.25 per game. 119 passes for 625, averaging 156.25. And 113 rushes for 512, averaging 128 per game. The Falcons offense has scored 62 points, averaging 15.5 points per game. The Jaguars defense records 42 tackles, bringing them to 173. They had 4 sacks in the game, bringing their season total to 9. They added their 5th forced fumble of the season, and 9 passes defense, bringing them to 24. They doubled their interception total with 2 INTs on Sunday. Their season total is now 4, and they also have their first defensive touchdown of the 2023 campaign in this game. Through 4 games, the Jaguars defense has seen 237 plays and allowed 1,332 yards, averaging 333 yards per game. 141 passes allowed for 953, averaging 238.25. And 96 rushes for 379, averaging 94.75 yards per game. Jacksonville's defense has allowed 82 points, averaging 20.5. The Atlanta defense had 43 tackles and 146 through 4 games. They would sack Trevor Lawrence twice, bringing their sack total to 5. They forced a couple fumbles in this game, numbers 2 and 3. And they stay at 13 passes defense for the season. With no interceptions or touchdowns, but the Falcon defense do have 3 INTs from earlier this year. In 4 games, the Falcons have allowed 242 plays and 1,163 yards, averaging 290.75. 126 passes for 705, averaging 176.25, and 116 rushes for 458 yards, averaging 114.5 per game. As for point differentials, the Lions are at plus 23. The Packers are at plus 4. The Jaguars minus 2, and the Falcons minus 15. Closing line is Jacksonville minus 3.5. Over under is 42.5. The 2 teams combined for only 30 points, with Jacksonville scoring the bulk of them. So this game finishes well under 42.5. There was a combined 587 yards and 115 plays by the 2 teams, averaging 5.1 yards per offensive play. I picked the Jaguars to win straight up, and I picked Jacksonville minus the 3.5, so I won both those picks. Up next, it's the Baltimore Ravens at the Cleveland Browns. No Deshaun Watson for this one for Cleveland. They ended up going with the UCLA rookie quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and it did not go well for Cleveland as they get blown out at home 28-3. The Ravens will play a rivalry game next week against the Steelers in Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, the Browns are in a bye week. They'll be back in week 6 hosting the San Francisco 49ers, and that's going to be a pretty big game deciding who has the best defense in the league. Baltimore with the win improves to 3-1, while Cleveland drops to 2-2. All right, let's check the offenses first. For the Baltimore Ravens, 52 plays for 296, averaging 5.69 yards per play. 19 passes for 165, averaging 8.68. And 33 rushes for 131, averaging 3.97. The Ravens had 16 first downs and 80 through 4 games. They went 4 for 12 on third downs at 33.3%. On the season, they are now 26 of 60 for 43.3%. They went 1 for 1 on fourth down, and on the season, 1 for 2. Baltimore had 8 penalties for 92 yards and 28 total for 259. Time of possession was 30 minutes and 10 seconds. Through 4 games, the Ravens offense has run 244 plays for 1,340 yards, averaging 335 per game. 105 passes for 735, averaging 183.75. And 139 rushes for 605, averaging 151.25. Baltimore's offense has scored 99 points, averaging 24.75 points per game. For the Cleveland Browns, they ran 54 plays for only 166 yards, averaging 3.07 yards per play. Passing numbers were atrocious. 36 passes for 73 yards, 2.03 on average, and only 18 rushes for 93 yards, but they did average 5.17 per run. The Browns offense recorded 13 first downs. This gives them 77. They were not good on fourth down either. 4 of 16 for 25. And for the season, 19 of 59 for 32.2%. They went 1 for 1 on fourth down, which makes them 2 for 4 this season. Cleveland had 7 penalties for 42 yards and 25 total for 212. Time of possession was 29 minutes and 50 seconds. In 4 games, the Cleveland Browns offense has run 262 plays for 1,265 yards, averaging 316.25 yards per game. 138 rushes for 690, averaging 100. That's not right. Hang on a second here. It's not 102 yards per game. It's actually 172.5 yards per game. So I'm going to go ahead and correct that. There we go. 175 yards, averaging 143.75 yards per game. The Browns offense have scored 76 points, averaging 19 per contest. All right, as for the Ravens defense, 43 tackles puts them at 179. They had 3 sacks in the game, bringing their season total to 13. No forced fumbles. They remain with 2. And they added 10 passes defense, bringing their season total to 25. And the Ravens had 3 interceptions in this game. Their season total is now 4. And no defensive touchdowns. In 4 games, the Baltimore defense surrendered 256 plays and 1,043 yards, averaging 260.75 yards per game. 165 passes for 673, averaging 168.25. and 91 rushes for 370, averaging 92.5 yards per game. They allowed 58 points in 4 weeks, averaging 14.5 points per game, and their point differential is plus 41. The Cleveland Browns defense also had 43 tackles, bringing their season total to 137. They would sack Lamar Jackson 3 times, bringing their sack total to 12. Also, no forced fumbles for the Browns. They remain with 2, and 3 passes defense gives them 17. No interceptions or touchdowns for the Browns defense on Sunday. They do have 1 INT from earlier this year. In 4 games, the Browns defense has allowed 195 plays and 787 yards, averaging 196.75 yards per game. 106 passes for an even 500 yards, averaging 125, and 89 rushes for 287, averaging 71.75. The Browns defense have allowed 60 points, which is an average of 15 points per game in 4 games. And their point differential is plus 16. Closing line was Baltimore minus 1.5 over under 38.5. The 2 teams combined for 31 points going under the total, 462 yards and only 106 plays. 4.36 is the average yards per play on offense by the 2 teams. I picked Cleveland to win 24-17, not knowing that Deshaun Watson was going to be out, so I'll take the L there. And I also took Cleveland plus the 1.5. So from one Ohio team getting blown out to the next, the Cincinnati Bengals go into Nashville and get murdered by the Tennessee Titans, 27-3. Next up, Tennessee has a divisional clash in Indianapolis with the Colts, while the struggling Bengals are off to Arizona to face Josh Dobbs and the Cardinals. Tennessee is now 2-2. Cincinnati is 1-3. We'll start with the Tennessee Titans offense. 59 plays for 400 yards, 6.78 yards per play. 26 passes for 227, 8.73 yards per pass. 33 rushes for 173, 5.24 yards per run. Tennessee had 23 first downs in 66 through 4 games. Third downs, 8 for 13, 61.5%. And for the season, 18 for 50 at 36%. The Titans offense went 1 for 1 on 4th down, and on the season, they're 2 for 3. The Titans have 5 penalties for 27 yards and 26 total for 197. Time of possession was 34 minutes and 45 seconds. So the Titans were that close to being into ball hawk territory. In 4 games, Tennessee's offense has run 213 plays for 1,119 yards, averaging 279.75 yards per game. 109 passes for 676, averaging 169, and 104 rushes, I should say, for 443 yards, averaging 110.75 per game. The Titans offense has scored 72 points, averaging 18 per contest. The Cincinnati Bengals offense was non-existent in this game. 48 plays for 211 yards, averaging 4.40 yards per play. 30 passes for 139, 4.63 average per pass, and 18 rushes for 72 yards, averaging an offense. Only 14 first downs, which gives them 58 through 4 games. And their struggles on 3rd down continues. They were 2 of 9 on Sunday for 22.2%. And for the season, 19 of 56 for 33.9%. They went 0 for 1 on fourth down and 2 of 4 for the season. Cincinnati had 5 penalties for 40 yards and only 21 through 4 games for 139. So this is another one of the least penalized teams in the NFL. Time of possession, 25 minutes, 15 seconds. In 4 games, the Bengals offense has run 228 plays for 944 yards, averaging 236 per game. For a Joe Burrow-led offense, that is not good. 152 passes for 664, averaging 166. And 76 rushes for 280, averaging 70 yards a game. And the Bengals offense not putting up points either. Only 49 points. That's 12.25 points per game. The fewest of any AFC team and the second fewest in the NFL behind or ahead of the New York Giants. On defense, the Tennessee Titans records 41 tackles. They have 181 through 4 games. 3 sacks on Joe Burrow, bringing them to 13. They forced 2 fumbles in the game, numbers 5 and 6. They had 5 passes defense, bringing their total to 12, with no interceptions or touchdowns against Cincinnati. They do have an interception from earlier. In 4 games, the Titans defense has surrendered 234 plays and 1,245 yards, averaging 311.25. 137 passes for 965, averaging 241.25. And 97 rushes for 280, allowing 70 yards on the ground per game. Tennessee's defense has surrendered 70 points, which is 17.5 per game. Point differential for the Titans is +2. As for the Cincinnati Bengals defense, they had 48 tackles and 183 through 4 games. 3 sacks on Ryan Tannehill brings their season total to 12. They added their second forced fumble of the season and their 14th pass defense of the year. They also added their 4th interception with no defensive touchdowns. So that means the Bengals had 1 interception on Sunday and they have 4 so far this year. Bengals defense through 4 games, 244 plays, 1,457 yards allowed, averaging 364.25. 121 passes for 829, averaging 207.25, and 123 rushes for 628, averaging 157 per game. The Bengals defense has allowed 94 points, averaging 23.5 points per game. And their point differential, which I did not write in, is -45. All right, there we go. Closing line was Cincy -2, over under 45.5, or rather 41.5. The 2 teams combined to score 30 points. That's under the total. 611 yards of total offense, 107 plays, averaging 5.71 yards per play. I picked both the Bengals straight up and ATS. And I did not fare well in those picks. All right, page 2 now. Next up is the first of 2 games pitting winless teams against one another, as the Denver Broncos erased a 21-point second-half deficit to upend Justin Fields and the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field 31-28. The Broncos return to Denver next week to host the New York Jets, while the Chicago Bears play tomorrow night, Thursday night, in D.C. against the Washington Commanders. So Denver gets its first win of the season. They're now 1-3. And the Chicago Bears now losers of 14 straight regular season games dating back to last year, and 9 straight regular season games at home dating back to last year, both of which are franchise records for the Bears. They're 0-4. We'll start off with the Denver Broncos offense, running 47 plays for 311, averaging 6.62 yards per play. 28 passes for 214, averaging 7.64, and 19 rushes for 97, averaging 5.11. The Broncos offense had 17 first downs, 76 through 4 games. They finished 6 of 11 on third down, 54.5%, and for the season, 18 of 46 for 39.1%. Denver had no fourth down plays on offense, so they remained 2 for 3 in that department. The Broncos had 7 penalties for 39 yards, 33 total flags for 226. Time of possession was 26 minutes and 11 seconds. In 4 games, the Broncos offense has recorded 216 plays and 1,333 yards, averaging 333.25 per game, reaching 95.5 yards per game. The Broncos have scored 100 points on the nose, averaging 25 per game. The Chicago Bears offense was very good on Sunday. 66 plays for 471 yards, averaging 7.14 yards per play. 35 passes for 300, averaging 8.57, and passes for 171, averaging 5.52. Chicago had 26 first downs, which is a season high. That brings them to 73. They finished 6 of 12 on third down for 50%, and this season they're 19 of 50 for 38%. They went 1 for 3 on fourth down, and for the season, 3 for 7. Chicago had 10 penalties for 91 yards and 28 through 4 games for 212. Time of possession, 33 minutes and 49 seconds. So this puts Chicago close to ball hog territory. The Chicago Bears offense in 4 games, 225 plays, 1,221 yards, averaging now 305.25 yards per game. 123 passes for 745, averaging 186.25, and 102 rushes for 476, averaging 119. Bears offense have scored 75 points, averaging 18.75 points per game. The Denver defense records 51 tackles, bringing them to 178. They would total their sacks in this game. They had 4 on Sunday and 8 on the season. They would add 1 more forced fumble, their second. 4 passes defense brings them to 13. They had an interception and a touchdown, so now they have 2 interceptions and 1 defensive score. And, of course, that defensive score coming in the Bears game. In 4 weeks, the Denver defense, 254 plays and 1,846 yards, averaging 461.5 yards per game. 128 passes for 1,142. That's an average of 285.5. And 126 rushes for 704, averaging 176. The Broncos defense has allowed 150 points, which is 37.5 points per game, and their point differential is minus 50. For the Chicago Bears, they record 37 tackles, bringing them to 172. They added another sack in this game, or 1 sack in this game. That's 2 on the season. No forced fumbles in the game, 2 on the season there. Only 1 pass defensed, that's 10 on the season. And no interceptions or touchdowns against the Broncos. They have 2 interceptions from earlier this year. In 4 weeks, the Bears defense, 249 plays allowed and 1,533 yards, averaging 383.25. 127 passes for 1071, averaging 267.75, and 122 rushes for 462, averaging 115.5 per game. Chicago's defense has allowed 137 points, averaging 34.25 points per game. Point differential for the Bears is minus 62. Closing line was Denver minus 3, over under was 47. The two teams finished well over that at 59 points, 782 yards of offense, and 113 plays, averaging 6.92 yards per play. I picked the Broncos both straight up and ATS. Next up, it's the LA Rams winning in overtime over the Indianapolis Colts 29-23. The Rams are headed home to LA to host the Philadelphia Eagles, one of two unbeatens remaining in the NFL, while the Colts return home to host the Tennessee Titans in an AFC South Division clash. Both teams are 2-2. We'll start with the LA offense. 76 plays, 467 yards, 6.14 yards per play. 40 passes for 303, 7.58 yards per pass. 36 rushes, 164, 4.56 yards per run. The Rams had 27 first downs and 97 through 4 games. 6 of 15 on third down, 40%. 25 of 57 so far this year, 43.9%. They went 1 for 1 on fourth down, which makes them a very good 4 out of 5 on fourth down. LA did have a bunch of flags. They had 8 penalties for 85 yards and 25 through 4 games for 221. Time of possession is 39 minutes and 46 seconds. That makes LA ball hawks this week. The Rams offense in 4 games, 277 plays, 1,571 yards, averaging 392.75 yards per game. 166 passes for 1155, averaging 288.75. 111 rushes for 416, averaging 104. The Rams have scored 98 points, averaging 24.5 points per game. As for the Indianapolis offense, 56 plays for 329, averaging 5.88 yards per play. 25 passes for 196 is 7.84 per pass. 31 rushes for 133 is 4.29 yards per run. The Colts had 19 first downs and 75 through 4 games. They finished 3 for 10 on third down for 30%. On the season, they're 19 of 56 for 33.9%. They were 1 for 2 on fourth down, and for the season, 2 for 7. They also had 8 penalties for 80 yards and 26 total through 4 games for 188. Time of possession, 24 minutes and 25 seconds. In 4 games, the Colts offense, 256 plays, 1,289 yards, averaging 322.25 yards per game. 141 passes for 826, averaging 206.5. And 115 rushes for 463, averaging 115.75. India scored 97 points, averaging 24.25 points per game. The Rams defense records 32 tackles, bringing them to 136 after 4 weeks. 2 sacks in the game brings them to 7. They had a forced fumble in the game, their second. 4 passes defense brings them to 12, with no interceptions or touchdowns on Sunday, but the Rams do have an earlier INT from this season. In 4 games, the Rams defense has allowed 225 plays and 1,183 yards, averaging 295.75 yards per game. 125 passes for 739, averaging 184.75. And 100 rushes for 444, averaging 111 yards per game. The Rams defense has surrendered 85 points, averaging 21.25 points per game. Point differential for LA is plus 13. The Colts defense, meanwhile, 55 tackles, bringing them up to 221 in 4 games. They had 2 sacks on the day, 14 this season. 1 forced fumble, that's their 9th of the season. 7 passes defense brings them up to 13. They had an interception, which is their 2nd of the year, and no defensive touchdowns, but they do have one from an earlier game. The Colts defense in 4 games has surrendered 285 plays for 1,562 yards, averaging 390.5 yards per game. 150 passes for 1055. That's an average of 263.75. And 135 rushes for 507, allowing 126.75 yards per game. Indy's defense has allowed 99 points, averaging 24.75 points per game. Their point differential is -2. Closing line was LA -1.5, over under 44.5. The two teams combined to score 52 points, going over the total, 796 yards and 132 offensive plays, averaging 6.03 yards per play. I took LA 28-16 straight up, and I also took the Rams -1.5. Now to the Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. Last week, the Dolphins made history, hanging 70 points on a very lackluster Denver Broncos squad at home. Now they go to Orchard Park, and the tables turn as the Bills win this one 48-20. The Bills are headed to London this week to host the Jacksonville Jaguars in a game in which they're designated as the home team. While the Dolphins will remain stateside, they return home to play the New York Football Giants. Both teams are tied atop the AFC East at 3-1. Let's start with the Bills' offense. 54 plays for 414 yards, 7.67 yards per play. 25 passes for 310, averaging a very cool 12.4 yards per pass. And 29 rushes for 104, averages is 3.59. The Bills' offense records 24 first downs. They have 92 in 4 games. They are 5 for 10 on third down in this game for 50%, and they're over 50% on third downs this season. 51% to be exact, at 26 for 51. No fourth downs for the Bills. They remain 3 for 5. Buffalo had 4 penalties for 20 yards and only 19 for 135 in 4 games. Time of possession, 30 minutes, 22 seconds. In 4 games, the Bills' offense records 254 plays and 1,564 yards, averaging 391 per game. 135 passes for 10-12, averaging 253. And 119 rushes for 552, averaging 138. Buffalo's offense has scored 139 points. They're averaging 34.75 points per game. And this is the 3rd straight game for Buffalo in which they have scored at least 37. The Miami Dolphins offense, who had the 2nd highest yard total in NFL history last week at 726, held to 393 on 54 plays, averaging 7.28 yards per play. 35 passes for 251 is 7.17 yards per pass, and 19 rushes for 142 is 7.47 yards per run. The Dolphins had 20 first downs and 102 through 4 games. That's the most of any team in the NFL. The Dolphins were just 3 for 10 on third down for 30%, and on the season 16 of 35 for 45.7%. They were not good on 4th down at all. They went 0 for 3. That makes them 2 for 7 on 4th down this year. Miami had 8 penalties for 98 yards. and 26 total for 237. Time of possession is 29 minutes and 38 seconds. In 4 games, Miami's offense has run 250 plays for 2,044 yards, so this is still the number one offense yards-wise in the NFL, averaging 511 yards per game. 138 passes for 1,337, averaging 334.25. That's also tops in the league. And 112 rushes for 707 yards, averaging 176.75 yards per game. That's either number one or close to it. Miami's offense has scored 150 points, averaging 37.5 yards per game. The Buffalo Bills defense recorded 48 tackles and 144 through 4 games. They had 4 sacks on Tua Tagovailoa and 16 on the season, so that's 4 per game. 2 more forced fumbles brings them to 5. 5 more passes defense brings them to 18. They add another interception to their growing collection. Now 8 INTs for the Buffalo defense. And no defensive touchdowns in this game. They have one from earlier this year. The Bills defense in 4 games allowed 186 plays and 1,152 yards. That's 288 yards per game. 110 passes for 678, averaging 169.5, and 76 rushes for 474, averaging 118.5. Bills defense has allowed just 55 points. That's 13.75 points per game. And their point differential is plus 84, which has to be at or near the top of the NFL in that category. As for Miami's defense, they record 40 tackles and 181 through 4 games. They would sack Josh Allen twice, bringing their sack total to 9. They remain at 3 forced fumbles after not recording one this week. They had 3 passes defense, bringing them to 18, with no interceptions or touchdowns in week 4. Miami does have 2 INTs from earlier this year. The Dolphins defense in 4 weeks has allowed 254 plays and 1,498 yards, averaging 374.5 per game. 138 passes for 1,003 yards, allowing 250.75 per game, and 116 rushes for 495, averaging 123.75. The Miami defense surrenders 119 points. That's a 29.75 average. Their point margin is plus 31. Closing line is Buffalo -3. Over-under is 52.5. This was the highest scoring game of the week as the 2 teams combined for 68 points. 807 yards and 108 plays on offense, averaging 7.47 yards per play. I wrote under for the 68 points, and that should really be over. So sorry about that. I picked the Dolphins both straight up, and with the points, I lost both picks. All right, now to the next matchup, pitting 0-3 teams against each other. The Minnesota Vikings beat the Carolina Panthers 21-13. And both teams have tough tests in week 5 coming up. The Vikings return home to US Bank Stadium to host Patrick Mahomes and the defending champion Chiefs, while the Panthers are off to Detroit to play the Lions. Minnesota gets their first win of the season. They're 1-3, and Carolina drops to 0-4. Joining the Chicago Bears as the only winless teams remaining in the NFL. We'll start off with the Minnesota offense. 42 plays for 265, 6.31 yards per play, 19 passes for 130. That's a 6.84 yards per play per pass. 23 rushes for 135 is a 5.87 average per run. The Vikings had 14 first downs and 78 through 4 games. They were abysmal on third down, 1 for 8, 12.5%. That's it. They are now 19 of 46 for 41.3% on third down in 4 weeks. On fourth down, they finished 1 for 2, and on the season thus far, 4 for 6. Minnesota had 7 penalties for 37 yards and 21 through 4 games for 142. Time of possessions, 21 minutes, 31 seconds. The Vikings offense does continue to produce, though. In 4 games, they've ran 230 plays for 1,483 yards, averaging 370.75 yards per play, or rather 370.75 yards per game. 157 passes for 1149, that's a 287.25 average, and 73 rushes for 334, averaging 83.5. The Vikings have scored 90 points. The Vikings have scored 90 points, averaging 22.5 points per game. The Carolina Panthers offense ran 63 plays for only 232. That's a 3.68 average per play. 32 passes for 149, that's 4.66 yards per pass. 31 rushes for 83 yards, which is an average of 2.68 yards per run. They had 20 first downs in this game, 6 more than the Vikings, and on the season they're up to 77. They were 5 of 14 on third down for 35.7%, 24 of 61 on the season for 39.3%. Carolina was 2 of 3 on third down and 3 of 7 through 4 games. The Panthers had 6 penalties for 80 yards and 29 total for 239. Time of possession is 38 minutes and 29 seconds, which makes them ball hogs despite losing the game. The Panthers offense, hardly productive in 4 weeks, 257 plays, 1,130 yards. That's 282.5 yards per game. 161 yards or 161 passes for 749 yards. That's an average of 187.25. 96 rushes for 381, averaging 95.25. The Panthers have scored only 67 points in 4 weeks, 16.75 points per game. The Vikings defense, 49 tackles and 188 through 4 weeks. 5 sacks in this game for the Vikings. That's 11 on the season. 2 forced fumbles brings them to 7. 3 passes defense brings them to 15. They did not have an interception. They have one from earlier this season, but they did score their first defensive touchdown of 2023 in this game. Vikings defense has surrendered 264 plays for 1,379 yards, averaging 344.75 yards per game. 137 passes for 934, averaging 233.5. 127 rushes for 445, averaging 111.25. The Vikings have allowed 95 points, averaging 23.75 points per game. Point differential is -5. For the Carolina Panthers, they record 32 tackles, 168 through 4 games. 2 sacks in this game brings them to 12. No forced fumbles, they remain with 1. 3 passes defense brings their total to 17. 2 more interceptions brings them to 4. And like the Vikings, the Panthers also scored their first touchdown on defense this year. The Panthers defense, through 4 games, 225 plays allowed and 1,252 yards, averaging 313 a game. 110 passes for 707, averaging 176.75. 115 rushes for 545, averaging 136.25. Panthers have allowed 102 points, averaging 25.5 points per game. Point differential is -35. Closing line was Minnesota -4.5. Over under is 46. The 2 teams combined to score 34 points. That's under the total. 497 yards in 105 plays, averaging 4.73 yards a play. I picked the Vikings both straight up and against the spread in this one. If you're joining me late, you're watching the week that was, as I'm running down through all the statistical numbers from week 4 in the NFL. And my week 5 power rankings will be coming up at the end of the recap, so stay tuned. That being said, let's move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers getting blasted in Houston by the Texans and CJ Stroud, 30-6. All right, the Texans are headed to the ATL to face Desmond Ridder and the Falcons, while the Steelers return home to host Lamar Jackson and the arch-rival Baltimore Ravens. Both teams are 2-2. In fact, every team in the AFC South is 2-2. Let's start with the Texans offense. 69 plays, 451 yards, 6.54 yards per play, 31 passes for 312, averaging 10.06, 38 rushes for 139, averaging 3.66. Houston had 24 first downs and 81 through 4 games. 6 of 12 on third down for 50%, 31 of 64 so far this year at 48.4%, which is really good. 0 for 1 on fourth down and 3 for 7 this year. The Texans had 8 penalties for 63 yards and 28 for 246 in 4 weeks. Time of possession, 32 minutes, 35 seconds. Houston's offense in 4 games, 266 plays, 1,474 yards, averaging 368.5 yards per game. 152 passes for 1,125, averaging 281.25. 114 rushes for 349, averaging 87.25. The Texans have scored 96 points. That's 24 per contest. The Pittsburgh Steelers ran 53 plays for just 225 yards. So this was a 2-1 clip in yards towards the Houston Texans. Pittsburgh averaged 4.25 yards per play. They had 28 passes for 111, averaging 3.96, and 25 rushes for 114, averaging 4.56. Pittsburgh only had 12 first downs in this game. That brings them to 53. 6 of 14 on third down for 42.8%, and for the season, 21 of 58 for 36.2%. Fourth downs were 0 for 1 on Sunday and 1 of 2 for the season. A pretty clean game for the Steelers. They only had 2 penalties for 18 yards and 19 for 174 in 4 games. Time of possession, 27 minutes, 25 seconds. All right, the Steelers offense in 4 games, 219 plays, 1,052 yards, averaging 263 a game. 132 passes for 737, averaging 184.25, and 87 rushes for 315, averaging 78.75. The Steelers have only scored 62 points in 4 games. That's 15.5 points per game. On to the defense. The Houston Texans records 40 sacks, 100, or rather not sacks, but tackles, 40 tackles. That's 167 in 4 games. 3 sacks. That sounds about right. Their total is now 6. 2 forced fumbles. That's 5 on the season. Passes defense, they had 5 of them and 12 through 4 games. They added their 3rd interception this season and no defensive touchdowns. They have one from earlier this year. Texans defense in 4 games, 232 plays, 1,247 yards. That's 311.75 yards per game. 125 passes for 781, averaging 195.25. And 107 rushes for 466, averaging 116.5. The Texans defense has allowed 79 points. That's 19.75 points per game. Point differential is plus 17. The Steelers defense records 43 tackles and 195 through 4 weeks. They had no sacks in this game, so they stay at 13 in that category. They added another forced fumble, which is their 8th of the season. And 4 passes defense brings them to 23. They have no interceptions or touchdowns in this game, but they do have 4 INTs and 2 defensive scores from earlier this season. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense through 4 games is 270 plays and 1,612 yards. They're allowing 403 yards per game. 144 passes for 1018, averaging 254.5. 126 rushes for 594, averaging 148.5. The Steelers allowed 100 points, that's 25 per game, and their point differential was minus 38. Closing line was Pittsburgh minus 3 over under 41.5. The two teams combined for 36 points, so they finished just a handful of points below Vegas's set total of 41.5. With 676 yards and 122 plays, they averaged 5.54 yards per play. I took the Steelers both straight up and against the spread, and you can pretty much sense how that went. Now to another upset on the board. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers going into the Superdome and taking down the Saints 26-9. Tampa Bay is in the bye week, and their next game is against the Detroit Lions in Tampa on October 15th. While the Saints are off to Foxborough to battle the New England Patriots and Mac Jones, potentially. Tampa Bay takes over sole possession of first place in the NFC South at 3-1, while the New Orleans Saints drops into a second place tie with the Falcons at 2-2. Starting off with the Tampa Bay defense, 66 plays for 353, 5.35 yards per play, 33 passes, 239, 7.24 yards per pass, 33 rushes, 114 yards, 3.45 yards per run. The Buccaneers had 21 first downs and 68 through 4. Third down conversions, 8 for 15, 53.3%. And on the year, they're 27 of 57, 47.4%. No fourth downs in this game, but Tampa remains a perfect 2 for 2 for 2023. The Bucs had 11 penalties for 91 yards, 25 total for 184. Time of possession, 31 minutes, 11 seconds. For the New Orleans Saints, they ran 58 plays for only 197. That's 3.4 yards per play. 39 passes for 127, averaging 3.26. 19 rushes for 70 yards, averaging 3.68. The Saints had 16 first downs and 69 through 4 games. They were 5 of 14 on third down for 35.7% and 23 of 60 so far this year at 38.3%. They finished 50% on fourth down, 1 of 2, and 2 of 3 through 4 games. New Orleans had 7 penalties for 58 yards and 24 total through 4 games at 237. Time of possession, 28 minutes, 49 seconds. Saints offense in 4 games, 244 plays and only 1,061 yards. That's an average of 265.25 yards per game. 143 passes for 791, averaging 35.75. Or rather, that's how many plays they average. They're averaging 197.75 yards through the air. And 101 rushes for 350, averaging 87.5 yards per run. Or per game, not per run. Saints offense, 62 points, 15.5 average. And now to the Bucs defense. 42 tackles and 173 through 4 weeks. 3 sacks in the game, that's 12. 2 forced fumbles gives them 4. 4 passes defense gives them 17. They added another interception. They're 6th of the year. And no defensive touchdowns, but they do have one from earlier this season. Buccaneers defense has allowed 241 plays and 1,274 yards, averaging 318.5 per game. 149 passes for 895, averaging 223.75, and 92 rushes for 379 yards, averaging 94.75. The Bucs defense has allowed just 68 points. That's 17 a game. Point differential is plus 16. For the New Orleans Saints, their defense records 40 sacks and 148 through 4 games. 40 tackles is what I meant to say, and 148 through 4 games. They had 1 sack, not 40, but 1, and 9 on the season. They still have 1 forced fumble after not recording any. 3 passes defense brings their season total to 29, which I think leads the NFL. They had 1 interception. That's their 5th of the season, and no defensive touchdowns. The New Orleans defense in 4 games allowed 245 plays and 1,217 yards. That's an average of 304.25. 145 passes for 804, averaging 201, and 100 rushes for 413, averaging 103.25. The Saints defense has allowed 76 points. That's 19 per game. Point differentials minus 14. Closing line was New Orleans minus 4.5. Over under was 41. The two teams combined to score 35 points. That's under the total. 550 yards of offense and 124 plays, averaging 4.44 yards per play. I took the Saints both straight up and against the spread, and once again, you can pretty much tell how that went. The last of the 1 p.m. games on Sunday went to overtime as the Philadelphia Eagles outlasted the Washington Commanders 34-31. Next up for the Eagles, they're flying off to LA to battle Matthew Stafford and the Rams, while the Commanders will have no time to sit on this. They play on Thursday night at home against the Chicago Bears. So the Philadelphia Eagles, now one of the unbeatens remaining in the NFL. They're 4-0, while the Washington Commanders, after 2 straight wins, they have dropped their last 2 games. They are now 2-2. We'll start with the Philadelphia offense. 64 plays for 415, averaging 6.48 yards per play. 37 passes for 311, 8.41 yards per pass. 27 rushes for 104, that's 3.85 yards per run. The Eagles had 23 first downs and 91 through 4 games. They were just 4 for 12 on third down, 33.3%, and for the season, 24 of 55 for 43.6%. They were a perfect 2 for 2 on fourth down, and on the year, 5 for 7. Philly had 11 penalties for 81 yards. That's quite a few. They now have 26 through 4 games for 195. Time of possession, 30 minutes, 55 seconds. All right. The Philadelphia offense in 4 weeks has run 270 plays for 1,568 yards, averaging 392 per game. 130 passes for 907, averaging 226.75, and 140 rushes for 661, averaging 165.25. The Eagles have scored 118 points, averaging 29.5 points per game. The Commanders' offense ran 69 plays for 365, averaging 5.29 yards per play. 41 passes for 258, averaging 6.29, and 28 rushes for 107, averaging 3.82. Washington had 26 first downs and 88 through 4. Third down conversions, 8 of 17, 47.1%. And for the season, 16 of 48, 33.3%. They were a perfect 2 for 2 on fourth down as well, and 3 of 4 on the season. The Commanders had 7 penalties for 41 yards and 25 through 4 games for 196. Time of possession is 35 minutes, 7 seconds. That makes Washington ball hawks. The Commanders' offense in 4 games averaged records 233 plays for 1,231 yards. That's 307.75 yards per game. 140 passes for 805, averaging 201.25, and 93 rushes for 426, averaging 106.5. Washington has scored 89 points, averaging 22.25 points per game. The Eagles' defense records 47 tackles 162 through 4. They added 5 sacks on Sam Howell in this game, bringing them up to 11. 1 forced fumble, that's their 9th of the season. 4 passes defense brings them to 18 with no interceptions or touchdowns. Philly's defense has 2 interceptions and 1 touchdown thus far this season. Philly's defense in 4 games, 240 plays and 1,295 yards. That's 323.75 yards per game. 164 passes for 1043, averaging 260.75. And 76 yards rushing, 76 rushes for 252 yards. That's a 63 average. The Eagles have allowed 90 points. That's 22.5 points per game. Point differential for Philadelphia is plus 28. Washington's defense records 50 tackles, 175 through 4, with 3 sacks on Jalen Hurts and 13 on the season. 1 forced fumble for the Commanders. That's their 4th. 3 passes defense brings them to 18 with no interceptions or touchdowns. Washington's D does have 2 INTs from earlier. The Commanders' defensive 4 games allowed 239 plays for 1,410 yards, 352.5 yards per game. 131 passes for 920, averaging 230, and 108 rushes for 490, averaging 122.5. Washington's defense has allowed 120 points. That's an even 30 points per game. Their point margin is minus 31. Closing line was Philadelphia minus 9. Over under was 43. The 2 teams combined for 65 points in this NFC East battle. 780 yards and 133 plays, averaging 5.86 yards per play. And this game goes well over 43. I picked Philadelphia straight up, but I took Washington with the points. So that turned out well on both ends for me. Now to the 4 o'clock game, starting off with the Los Angeles Chargers beating the Las Vegas Raiders 24-17. The Chargers are off in Week 5. They'll be back on Monday Night Football in Week 6, hosting the Dallas Cowboys at SoFi Stadium, while the Raiders play this coming Monday night at home against the Green Bay Packers. The Chargers' back-to-back wins evens their record at 2-2, while Vegas drops to 1-3. Let's start with the Chargers offense. 61 plays, 305 yards, averaging an even 5 yards per play. 24 passes for 150, averaging 6.25 per pass. 37 rushes for 155, averaging 4.19 per run. The Chargers had 16 first downs and 89 through 4 games. Third downs, 5 of 14 for 35.7%, and on the season, 21 of 54 for 38.9%. Fourth down plays, 1 for 2, and on the season, 5 for 8. LA had 4 penalties for 34 yards and 26 through 4 games for 241. Time of possession, 27 minutes, 9 seconds. Chargers offense in 4 games, 261 plays, 1,555 yards, averaging 388.75. 146 passes for 1,075 yards, averaging 268.75. And 115 rushes for 480, averaging 120 per game. The Chargers offense has scored 110 points, averages 27.5 points per. As for the Raiders, 62 plays for 264, averaging 4.26 yards per play, 39 passes for 188, averaging 4.82, and 23 rushes for 76 yards, averaging 3.3 yards per run. They had 22 first downs and 76 through 4 games. They were a very bad 1 for 11 on third down, 9.1%, and on the season, 13 of 42 for 31%. They were a perfect 3 for 3 on fourth downs. That makes them 5 for 6 on the season. That has to be tops in the league or close to it. Vegas had 9 penalties for 80 yards and 28 for 267 after 4 weeks. Time of possession, in 32 minutes, 51 seconds. Raiders offense in 4 games, 219 plays, 127 yards, 281.75 yards per game. 133 passes for 866, 216.5 yards per game through the air. 86 rushes, 261. That's 65.25 yards per game on the ground. The Raiders have scored 62 points. Point differential, or not yet. Their scoring average is 15.5 points per game. Jumping ahead of myself. Sorry about that. The Chargers defense records 50 tackles and 184 through 4 games. The Chargers had 6 sacks and 2 forced fumbles, all from the same player, Khalil Mack. So now they have 15 sacks and 3 forced fumbles this season. All right, they now have 22 passes defense after adding 3 against Vegas. They also had an interception against Vegas. That's their 3rd INT overall for the Chargers defense, and no defensive touchdowns. Chargers defense in 4 games, 259 plays, 1,615 yards, averaging 403.75 yards per game. That's not good. 158 passes for 1,199, averaging 299.75. and 101 rushes for 416, averaging 104. The Chargers have allowed 104 points, averaging 26 per game. Point differential was +6 for the Chargers. Raiders defense, 46 tackles and 180 through 4. 2 sacks in the game, that's 7 on the season. They have yet to record a fumble. 7 passes defense, that's 13 on the season. They added their 2nd interception of the season after getting one this week, and no defensive touchdowns. Vegas's defense has allowed 248 plays and surrendered 1,348 yards, averaging 337 per game. 123 passes for 811, averaging 202.75. 125 rushes for 537, averaging 134.25. The Raiders have allowed 101 points, averaging 25.25 points per game. Point differentials -39. Closing line was the Chargers -7, over under 49. 2 teams missed that total by 8 as they combined for 41 points, 569 yards, and 123 plays, averaging 4.62 yards per play. I took the Chargers both straight up and against the spread. Now to the juggernaut known as the San Francisco 49ers, as they defeated the Arizona Cardinals 35-16. Big game coming up for San Fran in Week 5 as they host the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday Night Football, while the Cardinals welcome Joe Burrow and the Bengals to the desert. San Francisco joins Philadelphia as the only unbeatens remaining in the NFL at 4-0, while Arizona drops to 1-3. But give Jonathan Gannon credit because he has these boys playing. All right, let's look at the Niners offense. 52 plays for 395, averaging 7.6 yards per play. 21 passes for 271, that's 12.9 yards per pass. 31 rushes for 124, that's an even 4 yards per run. They had 30 first downs in this game and 99 total. 3 of 5 on third downs for 60%, and on the season, they're 20 of 43 for 46.5%, and they remain perfect on fourth down. 1 for 1 on Sunday and 2 for 2 on the year. The Niners had 4 penalties for 21 yards and 27 through 4 games for 234. Time of possession, 29 minutes and 14 seconds. Niners offense in 4 games, 244 plays for 1,592 yards, 398 yards per game. 112 passes for 980, that's 245 per game. 132 rushes for 612 is 153 per game. The Niners have scored 125 points, averaging 31.25 points per game. As for the Cardinals offense, 66 plays for 362. That's 5.48 yards per play. 41 passes for 257. That's 6.27 yards per pass. 25 rushes for 105. 4.2 yards per run. Arizona had 23 first downs and 80 in 4 games. Third down conversions very good, 8 of 15, 53.3%. For the season, 21 of 49 for 42.9%. Fourth downs, they went 2 of 3, and on the season, they are now 2 of 4. Arizona had 9 penalties for 55 yards and 34 total through 4 games at 303 yards. Time of possession favored the Cardinals at 30 minutes and 46 seconds. Okay, so the Cardinals offense in 4 games, 232 plays, and 1,351 yards. That's 337.75 yards per game. 123 passes for 777 yards. That's 194.25 yards per game. And 109 rushes for 574. That's an average of 143.5. The Cardinals offense has scored 88 points. That's 22 points per game. Niners defense, 47 tackles, 171 in 4 games. Only 1 sack in this game. They're 9th of the season. And the Niners still doesn't have a forced fumble in the game. They're one of 2 teams in the NFL without a forced fumble, the Raiders being the other. And they didn't have any passes defense either, so they remain at 14. Nor did they have an interception or a touchdown, but the Niners do have 5 INTs so far this year. Niners defense in 4 games, 243 plays for 1,137 yards, 284.25 yards per game, 175 passing for 873. That's an average of 218.25. 68 rushes for 264, averaging 66 per game. Niners defense has allowed only 58 points, averaging 14.5 points per game. Point differential is real good at plus 67. Arizona's defense, 37 tackles on Sunday and 178 through 4 games. 1 sack in the game, that's their 12th. No forced fumbles or passes defense. They remain with 2 forced fumbles and 23 passes defense this year. They also didn't record an interception or defensive touchdown against the Niners, but they do have 3 INTs and 1 touchdown from earlier. Arizona's defense in 4 games, 248 plays, 1,498 yards, averaging 374.5 yards per game. 129 passes for 970. That's not correct. 24.25. They're actually allowing 242.5 yards per game. And 119 rushes for 528, allowing 132 on the ground per game. The Cardinals defense has allowed 102 points. That's 25.5 points per game. Point differential is minus 14. Closing line, San Francisco, big number, minus 15. Over under is 44. Both teams combined for 51 points, going a touchdown over with 757 yards and 118 plays. The 2 teams averaged 6.42 yards per offensive play. I took the Niners both straight up and against the spread. Final Sunday afternoon game of the week is the Dallas Cowboys steamrolling the New England Patriots 38-3. And again, a big game for Dallas on Sunday at San Francisco against the 49ers. And the New England Patriots return home to Foxborough to host the New Orleans Saints. Dallas improves to 3-1, while New England drops to 1-3. We'll start with the Cowboys offense. 66 plays for 377. averaging 5.71 yards per play. 36 passes for 253, averaging 7.03. 30 rushes for 124, averaging 4.13. The Cowboys had 22 first downs and 92 through 4 games. They finished 8 of 15 on third down against the Patriots for 53.3%. This season, 32 of 62, 51.6%. Fourth down, 0 for 1, and on the season, 0 for 2. Dallas had 5 penalties for 32 yards, 29 total for 212. Time of possession, 35 minutes, 9 seconds. The Cowboys are ball hawks this week. Dallas offense through 4 games, 276 plays, 1,440 yards, averaging 360 a game. 139 passes for 875, averaging 218.75. 137 rushes for 565, averaging 141.25. Cowboys offense has scored 124 points. That's 31 points per game. The Patriots offense, 53 plays for 253, 4.77 yards per play. 30 passes for 200. That's an average of 6.67 per pass. And 23 rushes for 53 yards, 2.3 yards per run. New England recorded only 10 first downs. That gives them 74. They were 4 of 13 on third downs for 30.8%, 24 of 62 thus far this year, 38.7%. Fourth down, 0 for 2 on Sunday, and 2 for 8 on the season. The Patriots had 6 penalties for 50 yards and 24 total for 188. Time of possession, 24 minutes, 51 seconds. The Patriots offense through 4 games, 265 plays, 1,281 yards, 320.25 per game. 155 passes for 907. Average is 226.75. And 110 rushes for 374, averaging 93.5 yards per game. New England's offense has scored only 55 points. That's 13.75 yards per, or 13.75 points per game. The Dallas Cowboys defense records 35 tackles and 142 through 4 games. They had 2 sacks in the game. That's 14 on the season. They added another forced fumble, their 5th. 5 passes defense brings them up to 21. And they had 2 interceptions and 2 defensive touchdowns. In 2023, the Cowboys defense now has 7 interceptions and 3 defensive touchdowns. Cowboys defense in 4 games, 205 plays, 1,039 yards, averaging 259.75 yards per game. 108 passes for 592, that's an average of 148. And 97 rushes for 447, that's an average of 111.75. Cowboys defense has allowed just 41 points, the fewest in football, averaging 10.25 yards per game. Point differential was plus 83. The Patriots defense, 50 tackles on the day, 171 for the season. 3 sacks on Dak Prescott, that's 10 on the season. 2 forced fumbles brings their total to 4. 2 passes defense brings them to 15 with no interceptions or touchdowns against Dallas. But they do have an earlier interception this year. Patriots defense, 242 plays, 1,188 yards. That's 297 yards allowed per game. 135 passes for 784, averages 196 per game. 107 rushes for 404, averaging 101 per game. Patriots defense allowed 97 points, and their point differential, which I again did not write down, but I'm writing it in right now, is minus 42. Closing line is Dallas minus 6, over-unders 43. The 2 teams missed that total by a couple, as the 2 teams combined for 41 points, 630 yards, and 119 plays, averaging 5.29 yards per play. I picked Dallas both straight up and against the spread. That brings us now to Sunday Night Football. with Taylor Swift in attendance, the Kansas City Chiefs held off the New York Jets, and I mean literally held off the New York Jets. 23-20 is the final. The Chiefs are off to the Twin Cities this week to play Kirk Cousins and the Vikings, while the free-falling Jets are in Denver battling Russell Wilson and the Broncos. Kansas City is now 3-1. New York is 1-3. Beginning with the Chiefs offense, 66 plays, 401 yards, averaging 6.08 yards per play. 30 passes for 197, 6.57 yards per pass. 36 rushes for 204, 5.67 yards per run. Kansas City had 24 first downs and 91 through 4 games. They finished 7 of 12 on third down on Sunday night for 58.3% and 26 out of 53 on the season for 49.1%. No fourth down plays for the Chiefs on Sunday night. They remain a perfect 2 for 2. The Chiefs had 5 penalties for 46 yards and 23 total for 180. Time of possession was 32 minutes and 9 seconds, and the Kansas City Chiefs offense through 4 games, 266 plays for 1,572 yards. That's 393 yards per game. 148 passes for 1,024. That's 256 per game. 118 rushes for 548. That's 137 per game. The Chiefs have scored 101 points, averaging 25.25 points per game. The New York Jets offense, 55 plays for 336, averaging 6.11 yards per play. 39 passes for 228, 5.85 yards per pass. 16 rushes for 108, but a very good 6.75 yards per run. Excuse me. The Jets had 18 first downs and only 55 through 4 games. Only one team in the NFL has fewer first downs than the Jets. Third down, 5 of 12, 41.7%, and on the year, 13 of 49 for 26.5%. No fourth down plays for the Jets. They remain 3 out of 4 on the season. New York had 7 penalties for 42 yards and 17 total for 96. Time of possession, 27 minutes, 51 seconds. The anemic Jets offense in 4 games has 206 plays and 1,011 yards, averaging 252.75 yards per game. 124 passes for 629, averaging 157.25. 82 rushes for 382, averaging 95.5 yards per game. Jets offense scores 62 points. That's 15.5 points per game. Chiefs defense, 43 tackles, 155 through 4 games. 2 sacks in the game. That's 10 on the season. 1 more forced fumble is their 4th. 3 passes defense gives them 16. With no interceptions or defensive touchdowns, they do have 1 INT from earlier. Chiefs defense in 4 games, 232 plays, 1,178 yards, 294.5 per game. 138 passes for 762, that's 190.5 per game. And 94 rushes for 416 is 104 per game. The Chiefs allowed only 60 points. That's 15 per contest. Point differential is plus 41. As for the Jets defense, 39 tackles and 211 through 4 games. 1 sack on the night. That's their 7th. No forced fumbles. That's 2 still. 4 passes defense gives them 14. They did manage to intercept Patrick Mahomes twice. So they now have 5 interceptions in 4 games and no defensive touchdowns. Jets defense in 4 games, 280 plays, 1,455 yards. That's 363.75 yards per game. 138 passes for 863, averaging 215.75. And 142 rushes for 592. That's 148 yards per game. Jets defense allowed 84 points. That's 21 points per game. Point margin for the New York Jets is minus 22. Closing line is Kansas City minus 8. Over under is 41.5. Total points is 43. They finished just over that. The two teams combined for 737 yards and 121 plays, averaging 6.09 yards per play. I took the Chiefs both straight up and against the spread. I won the straight up pick, lost the ATS. And finally, we've come to Monday Night Football, where the Seattle Seahawks dominated the New York Giants 24-3. The Seahawks are off in Week 5. We'll see them again on October 15th in Cincinnati against Joe Burrow and the Bengals. The Giants we will see next week on South Beach against the Miami Dolphins. Seattle is now 3-1, and like the Jets, the Giants are also 1-3. We'll start with the Seahawks offense. 49 plays for 281, averaging 5.73 yards per play. 26 passes for 160, averaging 6.15. And 23 rushes for 121, averaging 5.26. The Seahawks had only 13 first downs. This gives them 81 through 4 games. They were only 3 of 12 on third down for 25. And on the season, 13 of 45 for 28.9%. Fourth down, 0 for 2 on Monday night, and 3 for 5 on the season. Seattle had 8 penalties for 74 yards and 32 total for 291. That's like 8 per game. Time of possession, 24 minutes on the dot. Seahawks offense through 4 games, 228 plays, 1,279 yards. Average is 319.75 yards per game. 129 passes for 845, which is 211.25 yards per game. And 99 rushes for 434. That's 108.5 yards per game. Seahawks offense scored 111 points, averaging 27.75 points per game. New York Giants offense, 63 plays, 248, averages 3.94 yards per play. 34 passes for 136, that's 4 yards per pass. 29 rushes for 112, that's 3.86 yards per play, or 3.86 yards per run. New York had 17 first downs. This gives them 67 through 4 games. They were 6 of 16 on third down for 37.5%, and on the season, 21 of 56 for 37.5%. Fourth down conversions, 2 for 4, and on the season, they are 6 for 10, which means no team has gone for it more on fourth downs than the New York Giants, with their 10 attempts and 6 completions. Speaking of 6, New York had 6 penalties for 45 yards and 27 for 229. Time of possession in even 36 minutes. This puts the Giants in ball hawk territory. Giants offense in 4 games, 229 plays, 1,008 yards, 252 yards a game. 134 passes for 632. That's 158 yards a game. And 95 rushes for 376, which is 94 yards per game. The Giants have scored the fewest points in the NFL through 4 weeks at 46. That's 11.5 points per game. As for the Seahawks defense, 55 tackles and 195 through 6 games. Not 6 games, but rather 4. And how about this? The Seahawks had a sack party on Monday night. How about 11 sacks on Danny Dimes on Monday night? Seattle's defense entered Monday night with just 5 sacks. They record 11 against the Giants. That ups their total to 16. 2 forced fumbles gives them 4. 4 passes defense gives them 16. They had a couple interceptions. bringing them up to 3. And they scored yet another defensive touchdown, their second of the season. Seahawks defense in 4 games, 275 plays, 1,470 yards, averaging 367.5 yards per play, or 367.5 yards per game. 165 passes for 1,120 yards. That's an even 280 allowed through the air per game. And 110 rushes for 350, averaging 87.5 yards per play. Seahawks defense has allowed 91 points, 22.75 points per game. Point differential for the Hawks is plus 20. And for the New York Jets defense, the New York Giants defense, they recorded 37 tackles, which brings them up to 156 in 4 games. 2 sacks on the night. That's 3 and 4 on the season. They have 1 forced fumble on the year after not recording one on Monday night. 4 passes defense, matching the Seahawks. They now have 14 PDs with no interceptions or touchdowns this year. Giants defense in 4 games, 240 plays, 1,366 yards, 341.5 yards per game. 119 passes for 831, averaging 207.75. 121 rushes for 535, averaging 133.75 yards per game. Giants defense allowed 122 points. That's 30.5 points per game. Point differential for the Giants, minus 76. Not good. Closing line is Seattle 2.5, or Seattle minus 2.5. Over under is 46, and these two teams came nowhere near that, as they combined for only 27 points, 529 yards of offense, and 112 plays, averaging 4.73 yards per offensive play. I initially took the New York Giants in this game, both straight up and against the spread, but I changed my mind late Thursday night and went with the Seahawks 27-17, both straight up, and I took them against the spread as well at minus 2.5 points. So that was the only change of my pick this week. So speaking of which, how did I do with my picks? All right. I went 10-6 straight up and 7-2 against the spread. So far through 4 weeks, my straight up picks record is 41-23. That's about 64%. My ATS record is 31-25-8, which is about 55%. All right, so the ball hogs this week were the Lions, Rams, Panthers, Commanders, Cowboys, and Giants. Top ball hawks are the LA Rams for the second time this year at 39 minutes and 46 seconds. All right, before we wrap things up, here are my week 5 power rankings. And there was a lot of movement this week as I had a tough time ranking these teams. So, staying at number 32 are the Chicago Bears at 0-4 this week. They play the Washington Commanders on Thursday Night Football. Down a spot to number 31, the Carolina Panthers, the NFL's other winless team. They're in Detroit this Sunday. The New York Giants dropped to number 30. They're 1-3, and they are in Miami this week. The Denver Broncos, thanks to their first win of the year against the aforementioned Bears, move up 2 spots to number 29. They're home to the Jets this week. The Las Vegas Raiders drop a spot down to number 28. They will host the Green Bay Packers on Monday Night Football. Vegas is 1-3. The Arizona Cardinals slip a couple spots down to number 27. They're also 1-3. They're home hosting the Bengals. Next are the Washington Commanders, down 3 spots to number 26 at 2-2. They play host to Thursday Night Football against the Chicago Bears. The New York Jets at 1-3 fall 4 spots to number 25. They are at Denver this week. The Minnesota Vikings, fresh off of their first win of the season, move up 2 spots to number 24. They are 1-3. And congratulations, you get Patrick Mahomes and the reigning world champions at US Bank Stadium on Sunday. Good luck, Minnesota. Biggest drop goes to the Cincinnati Bengals, down 12 spots to number 23 with a 1-3 record. And if they don't beat the Cardinals on Sunday, you can pretty much call them done. Number 22, down 5 spots, are the Indianapolis Colts at 2-2. They will host the Tennessee Titans. The New Orleans Saints are down 5 spots to number 21 at 2-2. They play the Patriots in Foxborough. Speaking of the Patriots, they fell 7 spots to number 20, and again, they host the Saints. New England is 1-3. The biggest jump goes to the time for the biggest jump this week. There are 3 teams with the biggest jump this week, and this is the first of them, the Houston Texans. Rocketing up 9 spots to number 19. They are 2-2, and they face the Falcons in Atlanta. The Falcons, meanwhile, they fell 3 spots to number 18 going into that home game with Houston. They are also 2-2. Same with the 2-2 Green Bay Packers, down 3 spots to number 17. They are in Vegas on Monday night. Dropping 6 spots to number 16 are the Pittsburgh Steelers at 2-2. They will host the arch rival Ravens at Acrisure Stadium this week. Staying in the AFC North, down 3 spots to number 15 are the Cleveland Browns at 2-2. They are one of 4 teams off this week. Number 14, and this is actually the biggest jump, the Tennessee Titans. They're up 10 spots to number 14. They're 2-2 heading into their divisional showdown with the Colts in Indy. Up 9 spots to number 13 are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 3-1. They're off this week. Up 7 spots to 12 are the Los Angeles Rams at 2-2. They will host the Eagles. Up 9 spots to number 11 is LA's other team, the Chargers. They're 2-2 heading into their bye week. The Jacksonville Jaguars are back into the top 10 after Sunday's win in London over Atlanta. They are up 8 spots to number 10, and Jacksonville is staying in London to play Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills this week. Staying in the Sunshine State, the Miami Dolphins fell 6 spots to number 9. They're 3-1, with the New York Football Giants coming into Hard Rock Stadium this week. And then the next 3 teams all moved up a spot. The Seahawks at number 8, the Seattle Seahawks at number 8, the Detroit Lions at 3-1 and number 7, and the Baltimore Ravens at number 6. All 3 teams are 3-1. The Lions will host the Panthers this week. The Ravens are at the Steelers. The Seahawks are off. No change at number 5 with the Philadelphia Eagles at 4-0. They are in LA to face the Rams this week. Up 2 spots and leapfrogging Philadelphia to number 4 are the Dallas Cowboys, who have a big Sunday night showdown with the San Francisco 49ers at Levi's Stadium. Cowboys come in 3-1. Down a spot to number 3 are the Kansas City Chiefs at 3-1. They're off to Minnesota. Jumping ahead of the Chiefs up 2 spots to number 2 are the Buffalo Bills at 3-1. They will host the Jacksonville Jaguars in London. And still your number 1 team going into week 5, the San Francisco 49ers at 4-0 with a big Sunday night showdown with the Cowboys. And that is the week that was, as we looked at all the statistical numbers from every game from week number 4 in the National Football League season and the week 5 power rankings, which again, I had a tough time ranking those. Join me tomorrow as I make my picks for week 5, both straight up and against the spread. I hope you'll join me then. So again, we do the National College Football rankings on Mondays. On Tuesdays, we look at the college football television schedule. Next Wednesday, we'll be back with week 5 of the week that was. And Thursdays, I make my picks both straight up and against the spread. So lots and lots of football content all throughout the season. So join me for all of it. In the meantime, like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell and get notified every time I go live. Big Al signing off. Thanks for watching and enjoy the pigskin. Peace out. Peace out.